So, Bluch, thanks for coming on the podcast, mate, and here to share your wisdom for me.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Mate, over your career, you've worn several different hats. You've worn a journalism hat, an author hat, and now a consultancy hat. Look, I think there's many different reasons for those things, and in my eyes, there's stepping stones for your success and why you've become so successful. I just want to take you back to your early journalism days, especially about the Wallabies and the days of John Eales and Tim Horan and the Jason Littles. There was such an aura about this Wallabies team. Why did you love reporting about them so much, and what was great about reporting on them?
Well, my involvement with rugby, late 80s right through early 90s, was actually working in-house for Queensland Rugby in a media and PR sense. And so a very early appointment in terms of sport and sports media. So we recognised that rugby at a time needed promoting heavily because we were in a very congested market. AFL, the Lions, the Bears were underway. There was Broncos were making great strides, and soccer was always omnipresent. So we needed a voice, and so I was appointed to help raise the profile of rugby. And of course, the poster boys back in the early 90s in Queensland were Jason Little and Tim Horan, two, dare I say, good-looking, intelligent, articulate scallywags, but
they're the poster boys.
Yeah, great talent, and they were, of course, absolutely the front and centre of both Queensland and Australian rugby. So that was where it all started. Finished up writing a joint biography, which we call Perfect Union, which was launched in '95, and it kind of went from there.
Matt, I was going to bring that up because from what I can see, that you've sort of built your success based off building relationships with different players, and you sort of see in today's age and media that certain particular coaches, and I take Eddie Jones for example, he doesn't have a very good relationship with the media at all. He decides to take them on rather than treat them with respect and the others with respect and vice versa. My question to you is, mate, and as someone who's a journalist and been on the consultancy side as well, how important is that player relationship and with the coaches and the players?
Well, I think the simple answer is that you can't have too many friends. You can't have too many advocates. So I used to always talk to the athletes about stakeholder management. So if you think about stakeholders, the people who are omnipresent in an athlete's life, you've got the media, who you've pointed out, you've got corporates, you've got administrators, so the people that are looking after the game, and so NRL, it's not just the CEO of your club, but it's the whole NRL itself. You've got a massive stakeholder exercise in managing public perceptions. And then, of course, you've got your peers. And I also used to talk to them about the game's greats. So if you have a good number of those people, understanding of who you are and what you're about, and treat them well, you're putting yourself in a good position to not only survive but thrive.
You were talking about the way the players are represented in the media, and 15 years ago you started the consultancy business about telling the players ways that you can be perceived in the media and how to be perceived in the media well. Did you feel like with the rise of social media that there was a lack of something important there?
Well, the addition of social media made it a lot more complex for the athletes. So there's both a positive and negative. They no longer needed the mainstream media to present their personality, to, dare I say, present their personal brand. So that was they could go straight to their adoring public. That was the good news. The bad news was that there was no filter coming in either. So that meant, and we've seen a great recent example of the Wallabies and the challenges that they've had in the current World Cup in France. So if they had gone on to social media and see what was being written, see what the comments that were being made, and the vitriol that was being spat out at them based on the strength of just some substandard performances, that's a lot for young minds, let's face it, not fully formed male brains. Male brain isn't fully formed until the age of 30, let alone before you get into the cocoon of professional sport. So that's a huge amount for those young blokes to be taking on. And above anything else, there's somebody's sons, there's somebody's boyfriend, there's somebody's brother. They're human beings. And for them to take that on, the simple truth is that they're just better off not looking at it. And, you know, the male brain or brains are geared towards picking up the negative. So you could have 100 people saying wonderful things, but if 2 or 3 come up with something negative, that's where they're going to default to. So it's a huge challenge for modern day athletes is to shut out the white noise that is, you know, the public commentary.
I think the Wallabies is the perfect example of what you're trying to achieve, because there's, like you said, there's such a young team, and your role as a consultant is not only to maximise their performance on the field, but it's also to maximise their performance off the field and how they're perceived in the media and how they're supposed to respond to crisis, I guess. And those comments on social media definitely would push a button in my eyes. And even with myself, I got a podcast myself, and if there's a negative comment, there's an emotional factor that comes into that. How do you tell a player? How would you tell a player to react on social media and how to react?
Well, I think a couple of different things here. It's understanding who you are and what's important to you. So if you're making value-based decisions, being, this is who I am, this is what is important to me, these are my values, this is the sort of my guidelines for life, you're a lot less likely to run into traffic. But having said that, coming up with that sort of cerebral kind of approach to life at the age of 23, 24 or even younger is not really a space that most young blokes are in. But you can point out that the other thing I'd say is, treat people well. Sport is all about what you do and not who you are. So any time that you've got other people's vacation as your vocation. So in other words, most people watch sport for fun. They it's their relaxation. When the people we're watching, it's their job. So we'll all have a view of what how people are performing, what they've done well and what they haven't done well. And on any big stage, there's going to be people with their own preconceptions, and they're not always going to be fair, or they're not always going to be accurate. And athletes knowing that, understanding that that it's part of the territory, it comes with the territory, is a really important concept to get your head around, but not an easy one all the same.
You've dealt with some very high profile athletes. Can you give me an example of someone who is a high profile name that has had an oopsie in the media and how you've told them to overcome that? And
yeah, well, I like David Warner. I was part of a program that Australian Cricket ran, the Centre of Excellence. It was based at the Gabba, and so all the current players, when they were much younger, went through that, through the academy. And we were running through Greg Chappell and Freddie McFadgen. We were running programs that introduced the athletes to the sort of the stakeholder management matrix, which was, as we've said, your corporates. How do you get on with corporates? What are they interested in? The media, what we want. The media want interesting commentary. They want personality. They want really good and they want really bad. So it's just understanding the different agendas, and also how do you get on with your peers and associates. So you hear it in the post match interviews. Digging in for the boys and doing it for the boys and so forth. So there's a really important element where you're part of a team and you're wanting to contribute to a team environment. But some of the behaviour, you'd have to say, on a surface level, is quite selfish. So it's kind of helping them understand what they want to be remembered for. So do they want to bat themselves, or do they want to actually spare some time for the fast bowlers to have a bat? Are they good team men? Are they happy for other people's successes? Because athletes typically are very focused, they're very driven, and sometimes enjoying other people's success, particularly in a sport like cricket, for instance, that is an individual sport played in a team format, unlike the genuine team sports of AFL and league and rugby. So enjoying other people's successes. So that's all part of it. How do you want to be remembered? What do you want to be remembered for?
And the next step to that is obviously preserving their future for future endeavours. And you talk about the stakeholders, your teammates, the CEOs and of course the fans. How the fans want to see you treat, your perception of what the fans think. How important it is for you, and there's a large emphasis on this for you, is the future of athletes. And because once the crowd stops cheering, what's people going to remember you by? What's the importance for you in the future that they're giving back as well?
Yeah, it's a really interesting and fertile discussion point, that one, because most athletes typically, especially footballers, are done by the time that they're 35. So if you think of the standing working life going to 65, they might have had 10 or 12 years in that sort of space, but they've still got another 30 years to go. And you think of how many other careers you can pack into 30 years. So so the 35 years plus are critically important. So if all they've done is throw balls at hoops or hit tennis balls or kick rugby balls for 25 years and not at some level taken on something that complements, the challenges of what they're doing with sport, it's that singular focus that ultimately comes back to haunt them when they retire. So very much they're defined by, what they have done, and their sense of identity is linked to their playing career, their jersey number, their records. It goes without saying that it's very important to athletes, and it forms part of their identity. So I try to talk. I talk to athletes about not instead of, but as well as. So rather than starting something when you finish your football or your cricket, you're doing something along the way. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that serves them particularly well in just the shared focus and kind of, like, for instance, if you've had a big loss on the weekend, but if you've got a psychology exam, or you've got a trade session with an employee to attend to on the Monday morning, you're going to be a little bit, less focused on what has happened over the weekend, and perhaps recover from it a little bit faster.
I think a good example, and we were saying off camera that Ilsey was a good example of doing something while he was still playing. He was obviously doing his psych degree. Is there someone that that's a good example of someone actually committing themselves while they're still in their playing days, so they're set up for that 30 years after?
Well, Pat Carrigan's a really good example of somebody who's, got already a business mind. He's got studying physio and so forth. And so it can be done. Like, is it easy? No, of course it's not. But, you want something done, give it to a busy person. And I think that, time management is such a massive, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And they'd have a lot of downtime. And there's a lot of Xboxes or whatever the modern day equivalent it is. There's a lot of experts in that space that are professional athletes. So, I always encourage the importance of public speaking, because people want to hear from them, and getting comfortable, not just only in the Q&A type formats, but actually presenting keynote addresses. And Darren Lockyer was a great example of that. He came to me about 7 months even before he'd retired and said, I've got my eye on the speech at the Broncos presentation night in October. And this was January. And he just said, by the time October comes, I want to be standing up there and going bang. Nice. And that's, that's exactly what happened. I remember Corey Parker sitting next to him in the convention centre, and when Lockyer sat down, having delivered this amazing speech and standing ovation, Corey Parker has just leaned across to him and just said, "Where the hell did that come from?" Like it was a great, and he was quite proud of it because he'd put a lot of, he spoke for 25 minutes with just one palm card with 7 words written on it.
Mm.
So it can be achieved, and Lockie's a great example of somebody who's not only done very well on television, very relaxed in front of the camera now, but also has lots of different dimensions, brand ambassador roles for different companies, mining companies, retail groups. So a great example of somebody who's emerged from the game as a legend, but now he's a businessman who is on television and used to play a lot of rugby league.
Public speaking, it's not for everyone, and you can definitely see that with like post-game interviews, mid-game interviews, and although they're not at the best time, it's when you're the most vulnerable as well after you just finish your 40 minutes. Is it something that you can learn, or is it?
Yeah, absolutely, it's something you can learn. Like you chunk it up into the fundamentals, and different people have different strengths, but absolutely you can make huge inroads, and it's like anything. You sit down with a piano keyboard for the first time and you go, what the hell is this? But the moment that you have 2 sessions and you have 10 sessions and you have 40 sessions, then it becomes that, unconscious competence. And that's ultimately what you're looking for with public speaking. Some are naturally going to be better than others because of personality, but you can improve.
Mm. Throughout your consultancy career, you've written Bubble Boys, which was your book in 2013.
Yeah, 20 came out in early 2014.
It was an extensive look into the behind the scenes of the sporting industry, and it was quite fascinating because what people don't really see and what people don't really get was demonstrated in the book from an athlete's point of view. What really stood out for yourself when writing that?
Well, I spoke to 430 odd people, coaches, administrators, current athletes, retired athletes, physios, sports trainers, administrators, like right across the spectrum. And I think what really, the conclusions that you arrived at is it's impossible for all of them to get everything right all the time. Like you're going to have some loose moments. Like if you look at the representative sample of young male athletes, let's just call it 18 to 30, they're overrepresented in all the different social ills, aren't they? Whether that's drunken disorderly, whether that's drug taking, whether that's risky behaviour, they're just overrepresented. So do we think that young blokes who have access, who have notoriety, they have profile, they've got the scope if they want to misbehave. They've got money at their disposal. So there's lots of really good examples of good blokes who've made really poor decisions and suffered the consequences of it. What I'd also say is the old adage, you hang around with dogs, you're going to get fleas, rings true. So if you want to know what somebody's like, you take the group of people that they spend most time with, and that's going to give you an indication of where they're going to finish up. So just encouraging young blokes to find good influences in their life. And it's not always hard. It's not always easy because a lot of athletes come from interesting places and don't necessarily have the parental foundations that, other kids have, particularly in rugby league, typically a lower socioeconomic bracket that the game attracts, and that's not to be in any way disparaging, but it is. It's a working class game for working class kids, and there's lots of upside where professional sport have been a passport to a better life and a better lifestyle, a better education. A lot of professional rugby league players have got putting their kids through private school because they can afford it, so give them a better education. So sport, for all the ills that we think it might produce, it does a lot of good in society too.
Absolutely. I love Darren Lockyer's comment at the back of your book, and you'd know it, but he said that the most people have an opinion or a perception, but they also want to know the truth. This is an accurate account of what goes on in professional sport. So my question is, what's the most common thing that the public perceives that isn't quite true in the professional athletes world?
Oh, well, I think the key thing for me is that they see the Saturday afternoon or the Sunday night or the Monday night or the Friday night, they see the 80 minutes, but they don't see the endless physio sessions and the endless rehab so it's all bells and whistles, it's all bright lights and fairy floss, but there's just so much hard work goes into those, the cricketers 20 overs or the footballers 80 minutes or whatever it is, the 100-metre sprint swimmer, all the sessions that that go into that 42 seconds in the pool come Olympic time, just what goes into what is invested into that excellence is just extraordinary. So difficult. I mean, do we really care? No, I don't think we do. But I think it's an important insight. It probably just should make us a bit more tolerant if we actually, did know the just kind of how tough their training and their regime is, prior to the bright lights and the cameras.
But rounding back to you and your success, is it fair for people to judge your success in your career based on what the athletes are doing and their actions and behaviours out in the field? Because essentially you're coaching them to be better people out in the field. Judges.
Like everybody, I've had some successes and I've had some huge failures too. I think it rings true that you can't tell anyone what's important to them. You can point out the benefits, but it's that old adage, isn't it? You lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I've had some people arrive at very full troughs and not take a sip, and I've had others who have absolutely taken on board. Not just, I mean, it's certainly not me in isolation. We had a Quade Cooper, when Quade had his episode a number of years ago, made some poor decisions after a 20-hour flight and sleeping tablets, and don't ask Quade what happened because he's the last one who can tell you. But like a wonderful human, like he's developed into a wonderful human being. But I couldn't tell you whether that was my involvement or that was Will Genier's involvement or David Pocock's father's involvement or the career counsellor's involvement. Like it was very much a
group collective.
Collective, and it was all just pieces of a puzzle that came together. And like he's had not just a wonderful career in Australia, but he's gone to Japan. He's been a wonderful influence. He's got a couple of younger brothers who he just adores, twin brothers, and he's developed into a very solid human being, and is serving now as a great role model for a lot of rugby players and other young blokes who either enjoy boxing as he's now ventured into, or rugby or whatever it might be. He's
we're missing him in France, that's for sure.
Well, I think there'd be quite a few people that share that view.
Is there someone that maybe hasn't had this success and has fallen off based off your teachings, maybe, or?
There's been lots of people, fleeting involvement, and it's quite sad. I don't necessarily want to single people out who've kind of fallen the wrong way or fallen heavily. But it's when you appreciate where some of these kids come from, being beaten up by their father if they didn't score a try in under eights. like even if you look at the case of Bernard Tomic, now he's a highly complex young bloke who
has all the talent in the world.
Had all the talent in the world, and was behind the eight ball right from the start, based on a relationship with his father that was based on fear. And it was inevitable that whenever he stopped fearing his father, the relationship was going to stop. And ultimately, of course, that's what's happened. But for an 18-year-old with this precocious talent, to be so heavily instructed and guided and controlled by his father is really challenging. And, you know, we've all got lots of us have got relationships, sibling, father-son relationships that are good, bad, or indifferent. But when it's not only your, paternal relationship, but it's your career as well, hinging on it, then enormous pressure. And I don't know how old he is now. He must be close to 30.
Close to 30s, yeah.
So, would he like his time over? I don't know. I feel at some level, at a human level, really quite sorry for Bernard. I've had little to do with him personally, but I think it's fair to say that he was behind the eight ball right from the start.
And that goes back to what you said at the start of the podcast, is that we as a fan can only judge what we see on TV, right?
Yeah.
And that's the whole branding, the whole image type of thing. And he might have had his tough upbringing, but that's just the whole problem with what we see on TV is what we're going to judge by, and that's how we judge him, as this lunatic who's given his whole career away, basically. So
yeah, well, and equally, if you think of some of the concessions that were made at Burnett, like, he was the only kid on the Gold Coast that was allowed to drive an 8-cylinder car. And like, how good does your backhand have to be? What world ranking do you need before you're allowed at the age of 18 to own a V8 orange BMW? Like, it's just ridiculous. And that was another theme out of Bubble Boys, the adulation that we show, and the almost the false sense of importance that we provide athletes by us wanting to snuggle up to them and be friends with them. There's not a lot of truth. That a lot of athletes don't hear the truth, and sometimes they're much better that they be told the truth than told what they want to hear, because they're not they don't have the emotional maturity or the perspective to be able to discern, what's good advice and what's bad advice.
Mate, you got an incredible starting 15, an incredible starting 11 of people that you've mentored. I'll finish with this. What's your overarching goal now for the future, for your success? Because there's not much more that you could teach people to behave properly in the media, I guess. So you're also doing a lot of leadership stuff in different firms, businesses as well. What's your overarching goal? Where do you want to end up?
Well, I think with athletes, it's true that there's people who need you and don't want you, and then I think there's another whole breed that understand the benefit of what you can bring, but don't necessarily need you. So in a lot of sense, sport is very much a flawed model. So actively, I'm not. At some level, like, sport's a passion, but it's no longer in the future going to be a massive percentage of the time I spend, week in, week out, because for that very reason, you want to deliver. We all want to deliver value in what we do, don't we? So you're much better off, fishing where the fish are, and people who. Yeah, there's a lot of people that the place of sport, the world of professional sport, is very cluttered with people who want to be involved, and so now it's these days it's very much if people want some assistance, great, but not necessarily going and knocking on doors and offering it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your wisdom, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yep, you're very welcome.
Thanks for your time.